G'day everybody. Here's a video that I've been meaning to do for a while. This is a question I often get asked just as an owner of a Ram truck. This is my Ram 3500 and I often get asked this question, and probably more so in online forums and social media. The question is repeatedly asked: Landcruiser or Ram? Or let's just insert Landcruiser versus American imported truck. And there's some things that you want to take into account if that's the decision that you're faced with. Because I don't look at either of these vehicles objectively as an uncompromised winner. There are compromises on both sides, and you do want to be aware of that if you're entering into a decision of weighing these two up. First things first, these are my vehicles. So yes, for those of you that are very astute viewers, you will have noticed that this is a Gen 3 Ram. It's not the current generation, so you do need to take that into account. However, I will say that I have driven multiple of the Ram in the current generation, both in 25 and 3500, as well as the 1500. The 1500 I'll touch on briefly, but not so much specifically in this video. There's a whole nother video which is reasonably lengthy, which covers why I didn't buy a Ram 1500, and it will probably distill in more detail the pitfalls and as well as the good attributes of the Ram 1500 that you can weigh up for yourself. But anyway, this is a Gen 3, so this is an 05 common rail engine, not the current generation. But I have driven the current generation, and I've driven it on multiple occasions. I've spent some extended time in a friend's, like actually driving a friend's Silverado, and another good friend of mine has a current F250, and I have driven that as well as having an F250 many years ago, although that was a similar era to this car. This is, for those Toyota fans out there, this is a 100 series Landcruiser. It isn't a 200 series. So yes, this is an old truck as well. This is a similar age to this. However, in my last job I had a company car and they gave me a Landcruiser. I had two of them, and they are current generation vehicles because the current generation hasn't been superseded yet. It will be, but not yet. And I did about 180,000 kilometres in two vehicles over a period of 5 years. So I've actually spent more time in the current Landcruiser than I have in this car. I have a 100 series by choice. I love the engine, but that's a topic for another discussion. I really like the 100 series. It's all the car I need, which is why I'm more than happy to stick with it. But in any event, this is a good truck. I quite like it. This is a good car. I quite like it. But there are things that you need to be aware of in weighing these things up. But I am going to be talking about in the context of the current vehicles, but really the compromises that you make with either of these two are the same, more or less, across whatever generation you're looking at, pretty much. There has been improvement for sure, and I'll cover some improvements as we go. But overall, the things that would detract you from buying either Landcruiser or Ram, and look, you could also put petrol in here. It's a petrol, it's not a diesel. But you know, if you're looking at a petrol, not a Landcruiser, a lot of the compromises here will intersect. I just am not as well experienced with the petrols as I am with the Landcruiser. Anyway, if you're here, the first thing to say is if you're comparing these two, the principal thing that you would be more or less here debating is you're even entertaining a Landcruiser versus a Ram because of towing capacity. That's your entry point. Now, admittedly, if you have a caravan or a plant trailer with heavy machinery on it, and you want to tow over 3.5 tons, you can stop watching now. You're going to need a US truck. Quite simple. This isn't going to factor into your decision because what you're going to be pulling is too heavy for this. If you're pulling below 3 tons, the 200 series and the 100 series, but we'll talk 200 series. The 200 series has a tow rating of 3.5 tons. I would suggest if you want to tow something that's 3.5 tons fully loaded, and that's what you're going to do, and you're going to do it regularly, then I wouldn't buy one of these. I wouldn't buy a Aussie dual cab either, because there's just not enough room between your GVM and a 3.5 ton trailer and the tear weight of this vehicle, especially if you're going to add passengers, luggage and accessories, because you might fit a bull bar, you might fit roof racks, tow bar not included in the tear, if that's applicable. If you're going to do that, you're going to run out of weight. And if you're going to be touring, especially if you're pulling a caravan and you want to take family with you, or you want to stock that car full of luggage and stuff because your van's full at 3.5 tons, it's going to be difficult for you to manage the vehicle and stay legal under the weight across time and circumstance. And the same thing is true of the Aussie, like the D-Max, the Colorado, the Hilux, the Ranger, the BT50, etc. If you're going to own one of them, the same problem presents. There's just not enough room if you have 3.5 tons on the ball between the tear weight, the curb weight of your vehicle and the 3.5 ton trailer and the GVM. There's just not enough space there. So you're going to be compromising. You're not going to be able to do it across time and circumstance. But if you're towing under 3 tons, then you can start to compare again. Okay, if you're pulling under 3 tons, or 3 tons flat, this will tow it easier for sure. But this will tow it very, a 200 series will tow 3 tons, no problems at all. On 3 tons, you might need to do some suspension work depending on how you load your caravan or your trailer, and depending on how you want the car to feel. I've driven 200 series with 3 tons on the back, and it can lift the back ends can squat. You might want to firm that up a little bit, but that would be true if you're going to buy an Aussie dual cab as well, or even if you're going to buy a Ram 1500. Owners of the Ram 1500 I've spoken to have illustrated the same thing. Once you put 3 tons or more on it, it does start to squat. Airbags or something you might need to do on the back of it to make it a little easier to tow. But if you're 3 tons and under, obviously if you're going to buy a 2500 or a 3500 and you want to go like for like with, say, a Landcruiser Sahara, so you're going to jump up to a Laramie, or you're going to jump into one of the higher spec Silverados or F250s, then this is going to be a lot more expensive than this. So you have to see what other benefits you're going to get out of a truck like this compared to one of these if you only have to pull circa 3 tons, because this will do it. Other things that will immediately veto your decision and that you can move straight to concluding watching this video. If you need a tray, if you need a utility vehicle, obviously you're not making this comparison. Because you could chop one of these down, sure, but then by the time you chop one of these down, fit a good steel tray or something to the back of one of these, you're right up into the territory where you could have just bought one of these off the shelf. And look, dual cab converted Landcruisers do sell very well. These depreciate very slowly. They hold their value extraordinarily well, absolutely unbelievable. And dual cab converted trucks do the same thing. If you have a look at one of these, they depreciate pretty well too, particularly in the diesel. If history shows us anything, the early petrol Rams, F250s, when Ford were actually factory releasing the F250 and they gave a petrol option, they depreciated horrifically bad compared to the diesel. History will show us what the Ram 1500 will do, but if you have a look historically at the petrol Landcruiser versus the diesel Landcruiser, the petrol Navara versus the diesel Navara, the petrol the petrol Hilux compared to the diesel Hilux, if you have a look at all those, and then the F250 petrol versus diesel, the continual lesson is that the petrols depreciate horrifically compared to the diesel. We'll see what the Ram 1500 does. The 1500 primarily launched as petrol, but there is a diesel option now. We'll see how they hold up, but typically 4-wheel drive petrols do not depreciate as well as diesels, but we'll see how the 1500 goes. It's still probably a little early, and demand is hot, and there's not enough cars in the country, and demand is keeping that second-hand price of the 1500s very high, because not many of them come onto the market, because they're a low-volume seller anyway. Regardless, if you need a tray, you don't need to consider one of these unless you're going to chop one down. I wouldn't do that. Just for ease, I'd buy one of these straight off the shelf. But you know, I have driven a 200 series converted dual cab. It was a good quality conversion, chassis extension. I just can't see the point in cutting down a vehicle when you've got an equivalent vehicle you can buy that'll tow more, because this will tow, you know, more than, you know, even a converted 200 series, you're still going to be stuck with the 3.5 ton tow rating. I don't see the point in that when you can have more than that with one of these. But in any event, if you need a trade, this is where you look. If you need to have 8 people in the car or 7 people in the car, some Landcruisers, particularly the early 200 series, you could go all the way up to VX, the VX specification, and you could have 8 seats. Nowadays, that VX has 7 and the Sahara has 7, but the earlier ones, they do have 8 seats with the back. This is the 100 series, it has 8 seats. If you need 8 seats or 7 seats, this is no good for you, because it's going to be a maximum of 6. Mine is a 6-seater, which is one of the reasons that I bought it, so I can fit all the family in it. So if you need a 6-seater dual cab, you're immediately, with the exception of the Workmate Hilux from circa 2010 to 2015, there was a 6-seater there, extraordinarily basic, front bench seat utility, but technically it is a 6-seater. Outside of that, that's about your only option in a dual cab, unless you go with like one of the light trucks like an Iveco Daily or something where you can get more seating capacity in them. But 6 seats, this will do you. If you've got a 6-seat requirement in a dual cab now and you want a new vehicle, a US truck is where you're going to have to be at. Even if you chop one of these down, you're not going to get to 6 seats. If you need more than that, you're going to have to stick over here. So there's a few little things that will just rub you straight out that you won't even look any further. If any of those are powers of veto for you, well, that's fine. If you're going to get a 3500, if you want the extra towing capacity and the leaf rear end that the 3500 offers, you need to have a heavy vehicles license. You need to have LR. If you don't have LR and you have no willingness to get LR, well, in that case, you can't get at least a 3500 or an F250 or a 3500 Silverado unless you downrate it. This is a 3500, which I have downrated to 4495. So that allows me to drive it on a car license, allows my wife to drive it. I've got a truck license, that's no problem, but my wife doesn't, so she can drive it on a car license. It also gets me back into car rego. I don't have a need to pull any more than the tow rating that this has on 4495. But if you do with a 3500, you want to max that out, you will need a light rigid ticket. That does bring you into heavy vehicle registration, heavy vehicle motor insurance, and all those things are going to cost you more money. And it's quite a considerable jump. If you're in New South Wales and you're buying a vehicle that requires annual rego checks, with the 3500, that's a lot different to the 2500, and you want to be aware of that. It's a much more thorough check. And if you're driving down the highway, and there are points in New South Wales that have random or sometimes permanent places where heavy vehicles have to pull in if you're over 4.5 tonnes. An exception is a place like somewhere like Marulan. Marulan's over 8 tonnes. You wouldn't have to pull in with a 3500, but there are other inspection places in Blue Mountains, for example, where it's 4.5 tonnes you have to pull in. If it's above 4.5 tonnes, you would have to pull in and be subject to a potential heavy vehicle inspection. You have to do 100 kilometres on the highway. Technically, I've spoken to lots of 3500 owners who say, oh no, I just drive at 110 anyway and I've never been pulled up. That's fine, but as number plate recognition gets more sophisticated, you can fully expect that that's going to be policed. And that is something that you want to take into account, that on the highway, the maximum that you'll be able to drive is 100. You won't be able to do 110 if you want to comply with the laws. If you aren't doing that, even now you're breaking the law technically, which is another reason why my 3500 is downrated so that it's on a car, so I can do 110 on the highway. You're not required on LR to do a logbook or checking your state. Don't take my word for it. You always want to not take anything I say. Two of the gospel truth, always check out your local registration authority, whether it be the RTA or Vic Roads or whomever, to check the requirements in your state. Certainly, as I understand right now, in New South Wales, you do not need a logbook on an LR vehicle. So if you drove this as a 3500, you wouldn't have to complete a logbook, which is really good. But all the other heavy vehicle requirements do apply. So if you're going to buy 3500, that's something that you will need to take into account. Obviously, if you buy a 2500 or you buy a Landcruiser, you don't have to worry about any of that. So, but that's only if you're going to really tow heavy loads. You know, probably north of 4.5 tons on the ball, in which case a Landcruiser is not an option for you if you have that requirement. You're going to have to be over here somewhere in one of the US trucks, and if you just have that requirement with work or whatever and you want to drive one of these US trucks, well, that might just be what you have to do. In terms of practically owning it, so they're kind of your powers of veto things, the things that might just remove either option from you straight up. But in terms of ownership, look, this is a heavier vehicle in New South Wales. This is heavier than this. This costs more for me annually to register than this. It costs me more to insure than this. It's not too bad. I own a regional area which does drop those costs quite significantly. This is a business vehicle. I use it for business. It's used in primary production. So it does get me a concession there, but in any event, that's not available to everyone, but this would certainly be more expensive to insure and register typically than a Landcruiser. So you know your annual running costs of the vehicle are going to be higher. In terms of towing, the big thing that people will jump to is they'll say, oh, you know, this tows way better, you know, way less fuel in this than my old Landcruiser. It's not even close, or my old Patrol or whatever. And that might be fine. Like this gets me about, since I put the new injectors in it, I'm down to about 12.5. You know, that's about combined driving. I drive it pretty easy. That's unladen, that's without a trailer on the back. It does jump up a bit. I've had 3 tons on the ball and done it at about between 15 and 16. This with 3 tons on the ball is pretty close, it's pretty similar, but the advantage is this is unbelievable on fuel. It gets me about between 10 and 11 combined, which is absolutely phenomenal. Really good on fuel mode. My old Landcruiser did worse than that. It was about 11. You know, again, not driving it hard, but unladen, driving around. And I'm rural, so I do a lot of hot miles, you've got to understand that. But my old Landcruiser I had for work, they did about 11. So, you know, it's say 1.5 to 2 litres better than that. That's just driving around. And then towing, I didn't do a whole lot of towing on that, but again, a jump of 5 litres to put 3 tons on the back, you know, that's pretty typical. You could jump up ratchet as high as 20, depending on the gradients and hills you were going on and how hard you were working the car. But overall with fuel, I wouldn't necessarily jump to this for fuel saving unless all you ever did with it was tow. If all you ever did with it was tow, yeah, sure, you might get a saving over a Landcruiser, but you know, over time, you don't tow all the time. If the majority of the kilometres you do, you know, you might take the caravan away 2 times of the year, and say you do 30,000 Ks in a year, let's say 10 of it is towing and 20 of it is around town, it's going to be a wash in terms of total fuel costs over the course of the year. If you're doing 30,000 kilometres a year and 30,000 kilometres each year is towing, sure, there might be a benefit too. But if, let's say, only 5,000 kilometres a year is towing and then 25,000 Ks a year is not towing, you're probably going to take more of a hit driving one of these than one of these. So I don't really see towing diesel, petrol, yep, there's a big difference. You know, the petrols can be very thirsty, but diesel comparison, you know, I don't think that there's a whole lot in it. It certainly wouldn't be the principal factor that I use. We love talking about fuel economy. If you were going to buy this, you had one of these, and you're going to buy this as your daily driver, and as I said, 25,000 Ks of it a year was commuting to work, you're going to feel it when you fill up. You know, you're going to be paying more to fill this up than this. It's not huge, but it is there. If you're jumping from a Mazda 3 to one of these, you're really going to feel it. But we're talking Landcruiser versus Ram, so you know it is worse, but it's just not that big of a deal in my mind. I don't think, particularly for the versatility that you get with this compared to that. But you know, if you're watching every single penny, consider fuel economy into the equation. Now, I think these are really good for towing anything up to 3 tonnes, as I said, fine. Once you go north of that, if you wanted to pull between 3 and 3.5 and could do it legally, you worked out your tare weight and your accessories you were going to fit, the luggage you were going to fit, the people you were going to put in it, and you worked out, yeah, I can do all that legally, that's fine. It would then come down to me as to how frequently I was doing it. If I was doing, in the aforementioned scenario, if I was doing 25,000 or 30,000 kilometres a year towing, 80 to 100% of my driving was towing, I probably wouldn't do this, because north of 3 tonnes, you know, there's a lot of compromises. You're going to have to beef up that rear suspension, but it could be done. You know, you could do it for sure, but there's just a few too many compromises north of 3 tonnes. You're going to have to redo that rear suspension. But, you know, if you came to one of the later caveats, which we'll get to, and you thought that's a better option, then fine. Obviously, once you go past 3.5 tonnes, this isn't an option anymore. Whereas this with 3 tonnes, put it on the ball. As the saying goes, you won't even know it's there. Of course you know it's there, but you know what I'm saying. Like it does it effortlessly, really. And this does it pretty effortlessly. Like my 200 series really would tow, you know, 2 to 3 tonnes effortlessly for all intents and purposes. But once you get up to it, it's the suspension that starts to let you down. You know, your fuel economy goes up for sure, your engine's working harder, but your factory suspension, once you put a really heavy load on it, you know, starts to feel it. Whereas this on 3500, I haven't put anything behind this that I felt any need to upgrade the suspension for at this point. So practically, fuel economy, the other big practicality is actually driving the thing. And a lot of people love the seating position in one of these. We took it to Canberra the other day, and I got to say, I was reminded of that. Like, you sit so high, you're in an absolutely commandeering point of view. Commanding is the word I'm looking for. Commanding point of view over the road. It's a wonderful thing in terms of visibility. If you're on the highway, it's a wonderful place to be. Like, you fit in those lanes, no problem at all. But if you're in a cramped suburban street, particularly if you've got to turn around, you know, like, it's fine, you can do it, you've got to plan ahead, but you can get into some sticky situations where you're really, you know, relying on the patience of other people while you do about a 6-point turn to turn around in a narrow street or try and find a way to park it. In terms of parking, so we took it to Canberra the other day. We parked in an outside car park at a mall, which is fine. Like, you got to look at where you're going, especially with this. This is a long box. It's 6 metres long, or a touch over 6 metres long. So it's the longer box on it. It's a very, very, very long vehicle. If you're buying the standard box, it is going to be a bit shorter, but they are longer vehicles. And, you know, when you're turning, you want to just, I look ahead, yep, I can make that turn, no problems at all. But I did park in a couple of outdoor car parks, and thankfully was able to fit it, I would say just, but we did fit it in, just inside the lines, both width and length. It just fitted in there. In fact, when we parked in the first car park, someone came and parked, there were dual car parks, turned into it, drove all the way forward, and when we came out, someone had parked in behind me. And they fit into the car park, so it wasn't overhanging. You speak to some US truck owners, particularly if they own dualies in 3500, you know, some will say, oh, I'll just take up 2 car parks, mate. Or, you know, like with the dually, you know, long box, I just park in the middle of 4 car parking spaces, mate. That's how I deal with it. If that's what you do, that's up to you. I wouldn't recommend that. I think that's a pretty low move. Like, it's not other people's fault that you went and bought a 3500, and I think you should probably take it, you know, be at least a little bit considerate of the other people who want to come and park, you know, wherever you happen to be. Locally, I just park in the street. I just reverse angle park. I did park it in the Woolworths car park the other day because I forgot what I was driving. I just drove in and went, oh, this is going to be a little bit tight, because our Woolworths car park locally is a little tight. Wouldn't normally, this is the first time I've taken it in there. Normally I just park on the street and reverse angle park. But in that instance, I did take it in, and I was able to park it, but it just takes some, you know, some thought, and I was able to get it in and out in a pretty full car park. So don't do underground car parks in it. Don't do multi-level car parks in it. You know, I can feel a little bit cramped sometimes in those, in the Landcruiser. And some, especially in a car park I've never been before. If it's a car park I've never been before and I don't know how tight the turns are, I don't know how much space there is between the parks, how wide they are, I generally won't take it in there. I have parked it at airports, but whenever I've parked it at airports, I've always parked it outside. I haven't taken it in the multi-stories, just so that I know I've got enough room to stick it in there. And also, if someone parks beside me, then I know that they're not going to smash into the car, dent it or whatever, getting it around. But it is a compromise. Like, if I'm going to the city, generally I won't take this unless there's something I need to pick up. Like, it's fine to take it, no problems at all. It's nice to drive. You know, just cruising up the highway to a city, this will use more fuel than this, but not sufficiently to break the bank on the trip. But really, unless I've got something to pick up, or something to take that's very large that I need to stick in the box, I won't take this. I'll take this. Or if it's just me traveling, I'll take my Hilux, because Hilux has got cruise control. It's comfortable enough. It's fine, and it's just a little easier. It is. It's just a little easier. If I lived in a metro area, if I lived in a large regional city even, and this was my only form of transport, it was the only car I had, boy, I'd seriously consider whether I needed it. I almost certainly wouldn't own a long box. The long box is great. I absolutely love it. It's one of the principal reasons that I bought it. To have that 2.4 metre length tray. But if I lived in the city or even in a large regional area, you know, I would seriously consider whether I owned this if it was the only vehicle I had. I don't think I would, to be honest. I don't think I would own it. I think I'd probably own something else. If I was going to own a US truck, I'd step it down to a standard box, if not down to a F250 or 1500 or a Tundra or something like that, is probably what I'd step down to rather than owning this one. It is a bit of a compromise, you know, and if it's the only car you have and it needs to be all-purpose, well, at the moment I don't need this to be all-purpose. And if I needed it to be all-purpose in the country, I could actually run it that way. Like where I live, I've dropped the kids off at school with it. I can go and do the grocery shopping. That's not a problem. But you know, if I was in a different environment where I was, you know, in a larger centre, yeah, I'd probably rethink it. So this obviously is not a problem. It's very wide. You know, this isn't much wider than this. It's really not that much. It's like, you know, 5%, something like that, wider. It's not really width that does you, it's length. And with the length, it's the turning circle. You know, even the new ones are a lot better. Don't get me wrong. New 2500, 3500. The Silverado is really good. Nice turning circle, but it's still way bigger than this. And it's still way bigger than my Hilux. It just is. Yes, it's better than the old ones. No argument there, but it's still bigger. And when you're talking a bit bigger, you know, when you're in a tight suburban street, that little bit can make a huge difference on your day when you've got cars backed up either way while you're trying to turn around and parking at you and getting impatient. Or if you're just in the wrong place, you're taking a wrong turn, and then, you know, can you make a quick duck around here and get out again, or do you have to follow the street all the way through it to its conclusion and then figure out how you get back around again? Just things that, you know, can otherwise potentially ruin your day. The other big thing, if it's not a compromise on, you know, the size of the thing, comfort. Now, I have a lot of people, I've had a heap of people say this. I've read a lot of comments of people who've just picked up their new 2500 Laramie or, you know, their F250 Platinum or whatever. Oh, this is way nicer, way more comfortable than the Landcruiser. Just come out of a Sahara, 200 series Sahara. Oh, comfort levels, way better. Yeah, that's fine, you can have that opinion, but you got to realise when somebody tells you that or when you read that, is that they've just bought that new car. Of course they're going to love it. Of course they're going to love it, unless it's really, really bad, like there's some real manufacturer faults with it. Of course they're going to love it. They're going to tell you it's great, because if they don't tell you it's great, they're going to say, oh geez, I made a big mistake there, should never have bought this, geez, I wish I kept the old one. And sometimes that happens if it's an absolute outright lemon, but most people, after they've made a purchase, they're pretty happy with it. So take that into account, because the reality is, I know the new 2500s, you know, you've got sprung, and 1500s, you've got sprung rear end. That's a lot better, but you're still dealing with a utility vehicle versus a wagon. Now you have a lot of advantages, a utility vehicle versus a wagon. Now if you've driven, you know, like my old 1992 Holden Rodeo, and then you jumped up until the, you know, the circa 2005 to circa 2010, 2012, generation utes in Hilux and Ranger and all that sort of stuff. That was a huge leap. And then the current generation with D-Max and Hilux and Triton and all that is even a bigger leap again when you track back to the early 90s. Massive, massive jumps have been made in utility vehicle comfort. And for sure, the current generation in the 1500, 2500, 3500 are, you know, a lot better. And the gap is closer than it's ever been before when you're comparing sedans or wagons compared to utility vehicles. That is abundantly true. However, they're not as comfortable. They are just not. My 200 series, even this, it's like driving a couch. It's just magnificently comfortable. It's luxurious, it's lovely. It's so plush, because the ride doesn't have to factor in either a 4.5 ton ball load or, you know, circa 1 ton in the tub. This doesn't have to factor that in. So the suspension doesn't need to be, you know, as accommodating of that additional load. All this is really going to take is passengers and luggage. GVMs are lower, so, and sprung all round, and it can ride a lot nicer. This is a lot nicer than this, and with, you know, comparing current vehicles, you know, one of the nicest vehicles I've ever driven was a buddy of mine, 2500 Silverado, absolute top of the line, beautiful thing. But my 200 series Sahara was better. It was a nicer ride, it really was. And the interiors are way better. The interior on this one, on the 3rd gen, it's a bit plasticky. It's fine, but you jump into it and you can tell just by looking at the dash. It's an older car. It's just a plastic dash. The fit out of the current vehicles are really opulent. You know, so if you get one of those US trucks with the pack saddle leather, it's just a lovely thing to sit on. But, you know, the top of the line here, it's a beautiful place to be too. Lovely steering wheel, lovely leather, really nice interior, well appointed, nice features. But the ride to me, you know, I love this truck. I like driving it on the highway, I really do. But this is more comfortable. And the current generation versus my old 200 series, it's the same. The gap has narrowed, but it's not as comfortable. So, and you know, if you've got kids, my kids would take a ride in the 200s. You know, if we're going away and we've got to take their bikes or we've got to take something big they want to take, toys or, you know, luggage or whatever, they'll happily go in the Ram. Nice high driving position, they can see everything, leather interior, it's fine. They'll happily go in this. But if they're not taking anything away, if we're just going away for the day, duck down to, you know, a local regional centre or something, you know, 2 hours of travel down and back in the day, I'd almost always prefer to go in this. It's just more comfortable. And the gap has narrowed for sure, but the reality is, wagon versus utility, you are going to take a hit on comfort. You need to have a ride in both of them back to back, and you need to think about it objectively, because when you slide into a new car and everything's brand new and it's all pristine, lovely leather, lovely laid out dash, you know, it's got the perhaps better electronic aids and things in the car that your old vehicle used to have. You go, wow, this is way, way nicer. Compare the two side by side. Have a good think about it. You might not think that the compromise in comfort is that big, and that's fine. That's perfectly fine. But there is a compromise. There just is. I'm sorry, but there is, because there has to be. It's not the fault of Ram, Ford, or Chevy. It's not their fault. It's just that they have to build a car which has a suspension tune at the back that can handle carrying loads, whereas wagons do not have to do that, which is also why people who buy Landcruisers and do heavy towing will quite frequently jump to putting airbags and weight distribution hitches on them to try and level them out, which does take some of that opulent couch-like driving out of it, but it's a narrow compromise to let them do what they're doing if the majority of what they're doing is towing. So that's it. You know, you've got to weigh these things up. They're not the same vehicle. They're very, very different. But really, I think that on spec, you'll probably veto things very quickly. If you want to tow above 3.5 tons, obviously you can't own that. If you've got 7 people to cart around, obviously you can't own that. If you've got a requirement to have stuff in your tray all the time, unless you're going to commit to drive one of these with a trailer on it permanently, that's going to rub that out. So there are things that you're going to weigh up this way, that will probably rub it out. But if you're looking at it and going, well, you know, I've only got, so, you know, 3.1 tons to tow, don't need the tub, but it would be nice. You know, I've only got 2 kids in the back. You can weigh it up, and then you've got to look at it and say, is the extra cost of this compared to this, is that worthwhile? Is it worth paying the extra to have one of these as opposed to one of these? Does it? Is the extra remuneration actually balanced with the extra benefit that I get? And that'll just be a yes or no answer. For me, you know, if I had to drop it back to one car, out here, it'd probably be okay to be just owning this, although my wife would far more, you know, just on flexibility, would probably far more prefer we own just this, or you know, maybe this in a dual cab or something if we were downsizing or something like that. Just because, you know, it's a big car. It's a big car, and if you wanted to do everything, and everything for us does include trips to the city every now and again, and sure, it's only every now and again, but when you do that, there can be compromise. Not always. It doesn't need to be a deal breaker and say, I'm just never ever going to the city. But if you go to the city and you stay in a hotel and you want to valet park your vehicle, you're not going to valet park that, for example. Or you will, but good luck. You know, I've had a valet come back with a smashed in rear bumper on my previous Landcruiser, let alone that thing. So there are compromises. There are compromises both ways. There's some things that you will want to sort out beforehand. I did mention insurance and say that it was going to be more expensive. If you're going to 3,500, if you're going into that LR range, you will want to have a look at registration costs before you buy it, because that's an annual cost. Annually, you're going to pay that extra cost, and you want to work out whether you're happy to pay that extra cost. Same thing with insurance. The amount of people online that I see say, so where does everyone get their insurance from? I've just bought this truck and I can't find any insurance for it. If that's you, I hope you get your insurance sorted out real quick, but you know, if you've driven the car off a lot with no insurance, man, you're taking your life in your hands there. But in any event, some people get very shocked after they've purchased it because they might be insuring their Landcruiser for, you know, $1,200, $1,400 a year, and literally double or more that when they jump up to a Ram. Not the case for me, but I have seen some people lamenting the amount of cost it is. You've got to remember that's an annual cost. So if you're already, if it's a line ball decision and the Ram's slightly in front, or you know, Ram F250 Silverado, Sierra, whatever. If it's just in front and you say, well, it's going to cost me an extra $2,000 a year in insurance, an extra $1,000 a year, $700, whatever it might be, in registration compared to what I own now, and I plan to own it for 3 years, just excluding finance cost, the extra cost of capital, depreciation. I'm also over that 5 years going to be up for an additional 15 grand just in insurance and registration costs before we even get to fuel. That might be something else that factors into your decision that swings you one way or the other. I'm not trying to dissuade you from owning one of these. Their flexibility and their the abilities that they have is second to none, really. But the unfortunate reality is if you're buying one of these in North America, you wouldn't think twice about it. Big car parking spaces, lots of them on the road. In Australia, we have so many car parking spaces that even a dual cab utility, and like a Ranger or BT50 struggles to park in. I can struggle, trying to fit the Landcruiser in without going to get some serious supermarket dents, or have to let the kids out first before we get into it. There's so many of those now where the car parks are pokey, the spaces between the lines are very, very, very narrow. They're not built for these. So, but you can get around that if all you're doing is touring and all you're doing is regional areas, or maybe you only go to the city once a year or something. But there you go. That's my comparison. This versus this. The other thing you want to keep into account is have a look at your servicing. Who are you going to get to maintain it? For me, I do all my servicing myself. We do it all in-house. We have run multiple vehicles and tractors and equipment and all that sort of thing. So we service in-house. And I found this an absolute joy to work on, just because it's a thing I raise again and again, is the amount of information and videos and tutorials on how to do anything, any repair on one of these online is just absolutely phenomenal. It's way more, this is pretty good, but it's not even close to the amount of information that's available online at any given moment on one of these trucks. If you were going to do everything serviced yourself and you'd never done anything before and you were going to rely on tutorials to do it, this would be the better vehicle to own. But flip side of that coin is if you're not going to do that, servicing on this is going to be far more expensive than that. Parts for this is going to be far more expensive than that. So these are, again, like if you're already $15,000 over 5 years in insurance and registration, if you add fuel to that, if you add servicing to that, like you're going to do it yourself, if you add parts to that. If you have time to service it yourself and import them, is very economical. I've been buying most of the parts for this, in fact almost all of it, internationally, and I've found that the parts landed to my door for this are very comparable with any of the other vehicles I own, like the Hilux I have or the Landcruiser. But if you're going to rely on a dealer to do it and you're going to pay dealer pricing, I've really fallen off my chair as what some other Ram owners have told me they've paid for consumables and replacement parts for their Ram. Absolutely unbelievable how much they've paid. Very, very, very expensive. The parts for this, just consumables in Australia, I'll happily buy them. They're not too bad. I've almost bought all the parts, I think, for this that I've purchased, apart from the shocks, which I did import. But pretty much all the parts I've used to keep this running, I've bought domestically and found them quite reasonable in terms of cost, but servicing it by maintaining it. If you're in a regional area and you don't have, if you're going to buy it new, particularly if you're going to buy it from someone like ASV, one of the big things that people will throw back at me, ASV is factory back. It's basically factory back. Like if you buy it through SCD or something, well, it's not, or Maracunda, it's not factory back. Sure, fine, factory back in a fashion. I won't get into ASV versus Maracunda versus SCD, etc. today, but how prevalent are the workshops and what's their experience level with the trucks? Like they're not big sellers, not really, not the 2500, 3500, 1500s get becoming more of a seller, but when something goes wrong, are they going to have the parts and the skills to diagnose it, fix it, get it back to you in a prompt amount of time? Or if you're out regional where I am, like if I owned one of these brand new and I wanted to buy it because of the servicing advantage, there is no servicing advantage to me. There's not a Ram dealer within hours of me. And when you're hours away from your nearest dealer, sure, you could get it trailered to them if there's something goes wrong. But I'm without a vehicle for both the time it takes to get over there, or even if I've got to service it, I've got to commit a day to go there, drop it off, get it serviced, have something to do in the meantime without a car while I'm waiting to get it back. Not a real winner for me, really. But if you're close to a dealer and you're going to get it serviced, that's fine, but it will be an additional cost. And if something goes wrong, seriously, particularly if it's out of warranty and you're not going to either source the parts yourself and do it yourself, you're going to rely on someone to get the parts here. Some of the prices I've seen, as I've said, that some people have paid for stuff is just unbelievably high. So they are a specialty vehicle. I should have said that at the outset. This is a specialty vehicle. This is not. It's specialty insofar as it's a four-wheel drive wagon and it has real four-wheel drive capability, sure, but this is effectively an enthusiast vehicle. You know, it's a specialty vehicle. You've got to have a reason to own it. And if you don't, you know, hey, look, people own Ferraris and they own McLarens and they own Lamborghinis because they just want to own it. If you just want one, that's fine. It's your money, no problem at all. But there are a few things to do with it. I really enjoyed owning it. I don't mean to dissuade anybody from owning one. They are very good vehicles. And at the end of the day, if you come with a list of things, really, you know, if you're weighing it up, hey, you could go either way, but most people who I know who have ended up buying one, they've had a clear reason to do it. Need 6 seats, got to be able to move the kids, need a longer tray, got to be able to pull 4.5 tons, got to be able to pull 6 tons. They've had a clear reason, this is why I need it, I've got to have a US truck because nothing else will do it. You're weighing it up, there are compromises both sides, neither of them are perfect. And so many people will tell you that they're perfect. Oh, best vehicle I've ever owned. No compromises, everything's easy, everything's great. Objectively, I would counter that. There's always compromises. There is no perfect vehicle. And as with any vehicle decision, you've just got to weigh it up before you purchase it. And if you do that correctly, I think your ownership experience will be far better. I hope this is useful for you. Thanks for watching.